When I showed you getters and setters, I promised you that I would show you a shortcut for writing getters and setters, so we're going to look at that now. What we have here is our reindeer class. It's the same one we've worked with in previous videos, except I changed the order of the methods a little bit just to make it easier to see what I'm going to do to use the shortcut. So we have our initialize that sets the state of the reindeer instance, the attributes of the reindeer instance. We have getter methods for name and location that just make the name and location attributes available from outside the class. And the setter method, which makes the name attribute reassignable for a given instance. And then our takeoff and land methods that you've seen before. And down here in our driver code, it's the same driver code we saw for our getters and setters, where we initialize a new reindeer named Dasher, print the attributes of that reindeer, move the reindeer to a new location and change the reindeer's name, and then print the attributes again. So we can see that this code works in its current state because we have the getters and setters. Declaring getters and setters is so common that there is a little bit of syntactic sugar available for this. Syntactic sugar is the idea that Ruby gives you a shortcut, like a shorter thing to type, that ends up declaring the same method or taking the same action that you could have done longhand by spelling out the method. So the syntactic sugar for a getter is called attr. So at the top here, I can declare attr and use symbols for the names of the attributes that I want to make readable. This is a little confusing, but syntactic sugar often is a little bit confusing to read. So this basically says, hey, write me a getter method for both name and location. So this declaration here, attr name location, is exactly equivalent to these methods here. So I can remove these methods. And because I've declared this attr declaration, Ruby will actually declare those methods for me, and the result is exactly equivalent. This is nice because then at the top of the class, any new programmer who comes along can really easily catch up on what is readable, what is writable, just kind of help them get a quick glimpse into the attributes of the class and what sort of access they can have outside of the class. Similarly, with this setter method, there is syntactic sugar for that as well. So instead of having a setter method, if I want, I can use accessor name. And this is communicating that name is writable from outside the class. I actually don't need attr for name if I'm going to use accessor, because accessor actually allows for both reading and writing. And it's really common to want to give both read and write access. So now accessor is going to declare underneath both the getter and the setter for name. There's also attr. So if I used writer instead, now name would be writable but not readable, which is pretty unusual. Typically, if you're going to let someone write an attribute from outside the class, it makes perfect sense to let them read it as well. So you're not typically going to see this writer declaration. You're going to see accessor instead, which says, hey, give me both a getter and a setter method for this attribute, because we want it to be readable and writable. So because we have that, we can now take out our setter method. And you can see this makes the code a little bit shorter, a little bit easier to read, which is nice. And all of our code that accesses these attributes and writes this attribute, the name attribute, should still work fine. And it does. So anytime you need to provide access to instance variables, access to attributes outside of a class, you can use reader and accessor. You can also use attr if you really want to. but that's going to be a little bit more unusual. Typically, something is either going to be readable or both readable and writable.